At 9:47 a.m. on November 17, 1944, on the frozen forest floor near the village of Vozenach in the Hurtgen Forest, Private First Class Jacob Hayes lay flat on his stomach beneath a low-grey canopy of pine and earth. Air temperature was below freezing. The ground beneath him was soaked, compacted, and littered with pine needles, splintered timber, and shallow craters filled with thin ice. His breath rose in short white plumes and vanished almost immediately into the damp air. He was not positioned in a tree. He was not in an attic. He was not on high ground. According to United States Army sniper doctrine, he was in the wrong place. Every field manual issued to American snipers in the European theater was explicit. A sniper was to seek elevation. Height provided visibility, longer sightlines, and early detection of enemy movement. Trees, church steeples, farmhouses, and ridge lines were considered optimal firing positions. Ground-level positions were discouraged. They limited visibility, reduced reaction time, and exposed the shooter to close assault. Jacob Hayes ignored all of it. He was the last effective sniper operating in the entire 28th Infantry Division sector. Continuous German counterfire had suppressed American positions for 72 hours. A dense belt of shoe mine 40 to anti-personnel mines protected the enemy approach. German units were maneuvering aggressively, confident that any American response would come from predictable elevated positions. Hayes had been given a directive that bordered on the impossible. He was to stop a flanking maneuver by a German force estimated at over 400 experienced troops. The maneuver threatened to cut the division's supply road and collapse the exposed flank of Baker Company. Under normal circumstances, halting such a movement required a full infantry company with machine gun support and artillery coordination. Hayes was alone. He carried a standard issue M1903 Springfield rifle. He had 5 rounds loaded in his magazine. He had no spotter beside him. His position was unauthorized. His firing method violated every rule he had been taught in sniper school. He knew the consequences. His commanding officers had warned him repeatedly. His preferred firing positions were described as reckless. He had been threatened with disciplinary action after the previous engagement. Under different circumstances, he could have faced a court-martial for disobeying deployment orders and modifying government-issued equipment. But the front was collapsing. This precise moment, near a shattered German pillbox designated Agang 3, was where rigid doctrine and battlefield reality collided. Hayes understood something his manuals did not account for. The enemy had adapted. German counter-sniper and machine gun teams no longer searched the forest canopy randomly. They knew where to look. Elevated American positions had become predictable. Targets. The Germans advancing through the forest that morning moved with confidence. Their patrol was led by a seasoned non-commissioned officer. Their formation was disciplined and fast. They were closing the distance rapidly. 300 yards, then less. Hayes checked his rifle one final time. He adjusted the improvised cheek piece he had secured using canvas and pine sap. The stock rested low, almost touching the damp earth. His body was aligned behind the rifle, not perched above it. The ground absorbed his weight. It did not sway. It did not vibrate. The air around him carried the sharp smell of disturbed soil mixed with the acrid residue of cadite from earlier fighting. The forest was quiet in a way that only followed prolonged artillery fire. No birds, no wind, only distant, irregular gunfire echoing through the trees. Standard sniper procedure dictated that he should wait for officers or radio operators, remove leadership, create confusion, then withdraw before counterfire arrived. That method depended on elevation, rapid target acquisition, and immediate displacement. Hayes could not displace. Once he fired, he would remain where he was. The Germans were convinced the American sniper threat had been neutralized. Their attention was focused upward. Tree trunks, upper branches, ruined buildings. They did not consider the ground beneath their boots. Hayes did. His position gave him a perspective that felt unnatural. From 4 inches above the forest floor, the terrain looked different. Root systems became cover. Fallen logs became walls. Shallow depressions became concealment. The enemy's silhouettes were framed against trunks rather than sky. At that moment, the manuals ceased to matter. The task in front of him could not be accomplished according to doctrine. It could not be solved by elevation, visibility, or standard firing positions. The geometry was wrong. The terrain was wrong. The enemy had already learned how to defeat the rules. Hayes's solution was to abandon them entirely. What followed over the next 2 hours and 3 minutes would force a critical pause in the German advance. It would halt the flanking maneuver. It would secure the supply road. It would be recorded in after-action reports only as a disruption caused by an identified American fire, and it would begin with a single shot fired from a position that was never supposed to work. According to United States Army sniper doctrine, in 1944, the position Jacob Hayes had chosen was fundamentally unsound. Sniper training manuals emphasized 3 principles above all others: elevation, observation, mobility. A sniper was expected to occupy high ground or elevated structures that provided extended sight lines and early warning. From height, the shooter could observe movement, identify command elements, and disengage quickly after firing. Ground-level positions were considered dangerous because they reduced visibility and trapped sniper within close assault range. These principles were not theoretical. They were based on experience from earlier campaigns in North Africa and Italy. Elevated snipers achieved high success rates precisely because they could see first and withdraw first. Once detected, a sniper's survival depended on distance and the ability to relocate. Hayes's position violated every part of that logic. From the forest floor, his maximum sightline was limited by undergrowth, fallen timber, and uneven terrain. In many directions, visibility extended no more than 40 or 50 yards. Reaction time was minimal. If discovered, there was no clear withdrawal route. Crawling away would be slow. Standing up would expose his silhouette instantly. Ballistics further complicated the problem. The M1903 Springfield fired a .30 caliber round at high velocity, but it was optimized for longer range precision. At very low firing angles, close to the ground, the bullet's path risked deflection. Twigs, roots, and even uneven soil could destabilize the round. Sniper doctrine specifically warned against firing from positions where the bullet's immediate flight path could be obstructed. Hayes accepted that risk. Environmental conditions made it worse. The Hurtgen Forest was saturated with moisture. The ground was soft. Vegetation was dense. Sound traveled unpredictably. A muzzle blast near the ground could echo off tree trunks and expose the shooter's position instantly. Normally, a sniper mitigated this by firing from height, allowing sound to dissipate downward. Hayes was doing the opposite. The blast would reflect upward and outward, directly toward the enemy. There was also the issue of concealment after firing. Snipers relied on displacement. After 1 or 2 shots, a trained enemy would triangulate the origin and respond with machine gun fire, grenades, or artillery. A sniper without mobility was a sniper on borrowed time. Hayes had none. Once he fired, His body would be pressed into the earth, his rifle would recoil directly into the ground. Any attempt to move would disturb soil and vegetation, creating visible signs of his presence. He would be fixed in place. From an engineering perspective, even the rifle setup was questionable. Hayes had modified his stock to sit lower than standard configuration. This reduced profile but altered recoil management. Without proper elevation, recoil energy transferred differently through the rifle and into the shooter. Reacquiring targets would be slower. Accuracy could degrade over successive shots. Army armorers discouraged such modifications. They introduced variables that training did not account for. Hayes introduced them anyway. The manuals assumed an enemy that behaved predictably. By late 1944, that assumption no longer held. German units operating in the Hurtgen Forest had adapted to American sniper tactics. They had learned to scan tree lines. They had learned to identify muzzle flashes from elevated positions. They had learned to use indirect fire to neutralize likely sniper nests. What they had not adapted to was fire from below. From the German perspective, the ground was considered safe. Infantry doctrine emphasized threats from ahead and above. Mines, not rifles, were expected at ground level. Snipers were associated with height. German counter-sniper teams focused their attention accordingly. Hayes understood this shift intuitively. By placing himself where Doctrine said a sniper should not be, he removed himself from the enemy's search pattern. His position exploited an assumption rather than a gap. Physics still applied. Gravity still acted on the bullet. Sound still traveled. Visibility was still limited. What changed was geometry. From 4 inches above the forest floor, Hayes's targets presented themselves differently. German soldiers advancing upright exposed their lower torsos and legs first. Their movement intersected his firing plane, rather than crossing it at distance. At close range, bullet drop was negligible. Wind effects were minimal. His firing solution simplified as distance closed. The risk was absolute. One mistake would be fatal, but from a purely mechanical standpoint, the shot itself was possible. What Doctrine could not account for was the cumulative effect of repetition. Hayes was not attempting a single decisive shot. He was attempting sustained disruption. Fire, wait, fire again. Allow confusion to spread. Force the enemy to halt and reassess. Sniper manuals treated ground-level firing as a last resort. They assumed the sniper would disengage quickly or be overwhelmed. Hayes was not planning to disengage. The manuals said this could not work because they assumed the enemy would respond correctly. Hayes was betting that they would not. In that narrow gap between what Doctrine predicted and what the battlefield actually produced, the impossible became temporarily feasible. Jacob Hayes was 26 years old in November 1944. He was not a career soldier. Before the war, he had worked seasonal logging jobs in western Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia. The work was physical, repetitive, and solitary. He spent long hours moving through dense woodland, reading terrain unconsciously, learning how sound carried through trees and how movement looked when seen from ground level rather than from height. He did not think of this as training. The army did not either. Hayes was drafted in 1942 and assigned to the infantry. His initial performance was unremarkable. He qualified with standard weapons. He followed orders. He did not stand out in drill or classroom instruction. It was only during field exercises that instructors began to notice something different. Hayes consistently chose positions others avoided. He preferred low ground. He moved slowly. He remained still for extended periods without adjustments. When asked why, He could not explain it in doctrinal terms. He simply said he could see more that way. When he entered sniper training, those tendencies became more pronounced. Sniper school emphasized patience, camouflage, and precision. Hayes absorbed the marksmanship requirements quickly. His scores were solid, not exceptional. What separated him from other trainees was how he used terrain. Most students sought elevation instinctively. Hayes did not. He gravitated toward depressions, fallen timber, and root systems. Instructors corrected him repeatedly. They explained the advantages of height. They showed diagrams. They demonstrated sightline geometry. Hayes listened. He passed the course. He graduated. He did not fully adopt a doctrine. By the time he reached the 28th Infantry Division in the Hurtgen Forest, combat conditions had stripped away most theoretical debates. The forest was unlike anything covered in training manuals. Visibility was limited. Artillery shattered treetops, sending splinters downward like shrapnel. Elevated positions drew fire almost immediately. Snipers were among the first casualties. German units understood American doctrine. They watched the trees. They fired into likely perches. They pre-registered artillery on ridgelines and clearings. Hayes observed the pattern early. His first engagements in the forest followed standard procedure. Elevated positions. 1 or 2 shots. Immediate relocation. Each time, counterfire arrived. Faster, each time. The window narrowed. During one engagement, a sniper operating 30 yards to Hayes's left was killed less than a minute after firing from a tree platform. The German response was immediate and precise. Hayes took note. He began experimenting cautiously. Lower positions at first. Kneeling behind fallen logs. Then prone firing from shallow depressions. Each adjustment reduced visibility, but also reduced detection. Officers noticed the deviation. Hayes was warned. His platoon commander reminded him that doctrine existed for a reason. His company commander questioned his judgment. In one instance, Hayes was formally reprimanded for altering his assigned firing position without authorization. Under normal circumstances, that would have ended the matter, but casualties mounted. By mid-November, the division was under constant pressure. German units probed aggressively. Supply routes were threatened. Sniper support was in short supply. Experienced marksmen were wounded or dead. Hayes remained. His physical condition mattered. Logging work had left him strong but compact. He could remain prone 4 hours without shifting. He tolerated cold well. His breathing slowed naturally when still. These were not skills taught by the army. They were habits formed long before enlistment. Psychologically, Hayes was not aggressive. He did not seek kills. He focused on delay and disruption. He did not count shots. He counted time. How long could he force the enemy to hesitate? How long could he keep them unsure? By the morning near Vozenak, Hayes had been operating with minimal supervision. Communication lines were unreliable. Commanders were occupied with larger movements. He received an instruction to harass enemy advance and report observations if possible. How he accomplished that was left to him. His decision to lie flat on the forest floor was not impulsive. It was the result of weeks of observation. He had watched German patrols move confidently beneath trees. He had seen how rarely they looked down. He had noticed how their attention remained fixed at chest height and above. Doctrine told him to climb. Experience told him to sink. The manuals did not account for a battlefield where both sides had learned each other's rules. Hayes was not trying to be clever. He was trying to be unseen. When he pressed himself into the cold ground near Agang 3, he was not attempting to prove doctrine wrong. He was attempting to survive long enough to matter. Everything that followed depended on whether that instinct was correct. At approximately 10:06 a.m., the German advance entered the outer edge of the forest corridor Hayes had been watching since first light. The formation moved with purpose. It was not a patrol. It was a maneuver element advancing to secure ground beyond the American line. The spacing between soldiers was tight enough to maintain cohesion, but wide enough to reduce casualties from artillery. Rifles were carried at the ready. Machine pistols hung low. No one scanned the forest floor. Hayes waited. From his position, visibility was limited to narrow slices of terrain framed by roots and fallen branches. He did not attempt to track the entire formation. He focused on the leading element: distance. Close steadily. 200 yards. 150. The sound of boots on wet soil grew distinct. Equipment shifted. A low murmur of voices carried through the trees. Standard procedure would have been to engage officers or radio operators. From ground level, those targets were partially obscured. Hayes adjusted his criteria. He selected the man whose movement dictated the pace of the group. When the distance closed to just under 100 yards, Hayes exhaled slowly and fired. The recoil drove the rifle straight back into the earth. The sound cracked upward, sharper than it would have from an elevated perch. Soil sprayed lightly from the muzzle blast. Hayes did not move. The lead soldier collapsed forward without a sound. The formation halted instantly. German training emphasized immediate reaction to sniper fire. Soldiers scattered laterally. Rifles came up. Eyes went to the trees. Several men fired short bursts into the canopy. No one fired at the ground. Hayes waited 30 seconds. Movement resumed cautiously. To soldiers. Advance together. Crouch slightly. Scanning trunks and branches. Hayes adjusted his aim lower than instinct suggested and fired again. The second soldier fell. The other dropped flat and rolled behind a tree. Confusion spread quickly. The Germans could not triangulate the origin. Sound reflections in the forest were deceptive. Fire was returned at multiple elevations, but not at Hayes's position. He waited again. This pattern repeated. Fire. Pause. A stillness. Hayes did not relocate. He could not. Each shot was deliberate. He fired only when movement resumed. He allowed silence to work on the enemy. After the fifth shot, the German formation ceased forward movement entirely. Orders were shouted. A machine gun was brought forward and set up to break the tree line. Bursts tore through branches above Hayes. Wood splintered. Needles fell like rain. Hayes pressed deeper into the ground. The machine gun fire passed over him. At 10:31 a.m., a German squad attempted a flanking movement to the left. Hayes tracked the movements through gaps in vegetation. The distance was closer now. 60 yards. The risk increased. At this range, discovery meant immediate assault. He waited until the lead man crossed into his narrow firing lane and fired. The effect was immediate. The squad halted. One soldier dragged the wounded man backward. The others froze, unsure where the fire originated. By now the Germans were convinced they faced multiple snipers. Reports would later reflect this assumption. Fire was described as coming from different directions, from varying heights, from positions that shifted unpredictably. In reality, Hayes had not moved more than a few inches. Time stretched. Minutes passed without movement. Hayes remained motionless. Cold seeped through his clothing. Muscles stiffened. He adjusted his breathing to avoid visible vapor. At 10:54 a.m., mortar rounds began to fall. The first landed 50 yards short. The second overshot. The third detonated near a fallen tree to Hayes's right. Dirt and debris showered his position. He did not move and mortar fire ceased after several rounds. Ammunition was limited. Targets were uncertain. Without confirmation, continued fire risked friendly casualties. The German force began to withdraw in stages. Small groups pulled back under cover of others. Hayes fired twice more. Each shot spaced widely. Each produced another pause. By 11:17 a.m., the forest corridor was empty. The flanking maneuver had been abandoned. Hayes remained in place for another 20 minutes. Only when the forest returned to silence did he crawl backward, inch by inch, retracing his entry path to avoid leaving visible disturbance. He had fired 13 rounds. He had not been seen. American units moving into the area later that afternoon found evidence of disrupted movement, abandoned equipment, drag marks, blood trails that disappeared into the forest. No clear explanation. After-action reports described the delay as the result of persistent sniper activity of unknown star. NTH. Hayes did not correct them. From a doctrinal standpoint, what he had done should not have been possible. A lone sniper, firing from ground level, without relocation, should have been detected and eliminated within minutes. Instead, the geometry of the forest, the enemy's expectations, and the disciplined use of time had produced a temporary advantage. It was not decisive. It was sufficient. In the immediate aftermath of the engagement near Vozenak, the effects of the disruption became visible only gradually. American infantry elements moved forward cautiously later that afternoon, expecting resistance. Instead, they encountered silence. The forest corridor that had been under threat showed signs of hurried withdrawal. Equipment lay scattered in irregular patterns. Ammunition crates had been opened and partially emptied, drag marks cut through the undergrowth, indicating wounded men being pulled away rather than carried. No bodies were recovered. This absence complicated reporting. Without physical confirmation, the engagement could not be quantified in conventional terms. No enemy unit had been overrun. No position had been seized through direct assault. There was only the fact that a coordinated German movement had stopped and reversed direction. From a command perspective, that fact mattered. The flanking maneuver had threatened a narrow supply route, feeding multiple forward companies. Its interruption prevented isolation. It bought time. Artillery units were repositioned. Defensive lines were adjusted. By nightfall, the immediate danger had passed. In after-action summaries, the cause was recorded conservatively. The delay was attributed to persistent American sniper fire of undetermined strength. No estimate of numbers was provided. No position was identified. The effect was noted without analysis. Jacob Hayes's name did not appear in those documents. He was questioned briefly by his platoon commander the following morning. The questions were procedural. Where had he been positioned? How many rounds had he fired? Had he observed enemy casualties? Hayes answered carefully. He described his location in general terms. He reported firing intermittently. He did not speculate. On results, there was no reprimand. There was also no commendation. The army had no framework for evaluating the action. Hayes had acted independently, outside approved firing positions, without a spotter, and without relocation. None of this aligned with doctrine. Yet the outcome had been favorable. The response was silence. Within days, the division shifted sectors. The fighting in the Hurtgen Forest continued under the same conditions. Snipers continued to suffer casualties. When using elevated positions, Hayes was reassigned to standard infantry duties as personnel shortages increased. His role as a sniper became secondary to immediate manpower needs. The technique he had used was not adopted. There was no formal discussion of ground-level sniper deployment. Manuals were not revised. Training programs did not change. The engagement was treated as an isolated event rather than a lesson. From a doctrinal standpoint, that decision was logical. Hayes's success depended on factors that could not be standardized: terrain density, enemy assumptions, weather conditions, individual tolerance for immobility and risk. None of these could be guaranteed across units or theaters. What had worked in that narrow corridor could fail catastrophically elsewhere. The Army favored repeatable solutions. Hayes's action was not repeatable by design. In the months that followed, the war moved on. The Hurtgen Forest remained contested, casualties mounted, supply lines shifted, records accumulated. Hayes survived the campaign. After the war, his service record reflected routine infantry duty with intermittent sniper assignments. There were no annotations describing the engagement near Vozenak in detail, no citations referenced it, no interviews preserved it. The event persisted only indirectly, embedded in broader operational outcomes rather than personal narrative. From a historical perspective, its significance lies not in heroism but in contrast. Doctrine is built on averages. It assumes typical terrain, typical behavior, typical responses. It cannot account fully for adaptation at the margins. Hayes's decision to fire from the forest floor did not overturn established principles. It exploited a moment when those principles no longer aligned with reality. The Germans expected threats from above. The Americans trained for elevation. The forest imposed constraints neither side fully controlled. In that environment, a deviation became briefly effective, not because it was superior, but because it was unexpected. When the engagement ended, the forest returned to its previous state. Mud refroze, footprints softened, evidence disappeared under falling needles and broken branches. The ground absorbed the event as it absorbed everything else. What remained was a delay measured in hours, rather than victories measured in territory. For the men relying on that supply route, those hours mattered. For the manuals, they did not. The war continued according to established patterns. Doctrine remained intact. The exception did not become the rule. Jacob Hayes returned to anonymity within the larger machinery of the conflict. His actions were neither celebrated nor condemned. They were simply recorded indirectly through their effects. In the space between what was expected and what occurred, the forest had allowed a narrow outcome. In the weeks that followed, the engagement near Vozenak faded quickly from formal attention. The 28th Infantry Division remained engaged in the Hurtgen Forest, absorbing losses at a rate that left little space for reflection. Commanders focused on holding ground, rotating depleted units, and maintaining supply under constant pressure. Individual actions that did not result in captured positions or confirmed enemy casualties were rarely revisited. The incident involving ground-level sniper fire remained classified only by its ambiguity. Operational L reports referenced a delay. Intelligence summaries noted hesitation in German movement along the specific corridor. No document connected those effects to a single rifleman acting alone, without confirmation. Attribution was unnecessary. This was consistent with how the Army processed information during prolonged combat. Events that could not be quantified were acknowledged only in their outcome. Causes were generalized. Lessons were extracted only when repetition was possible. Jacob Hayes did not pursue recognition. He returned to routine infantry duties. When questioned later about the forest engagement, he offered no interpretation. He described what he had seen. He avoided conclusions. He did not frame his actions as innovative or exceptional. He did not suggest changes to doctrine. From the Army's perspective, that silence made the matter easier to leave unresolved. There were no interviews, no training memoranda, no revisions to sniper manuals. Elevated firing positions remained standard. Ground-level firing remained discouraged. The reasons were practical. The risks remained real. Hayes's survival did not negate the underlying dangers of immobility and exposure. From a historical standpoint, the episode illustrates a boundary rather than a breakthrough. Military doctrine is designed to produce reliable outcomes across thousands of soldiers and countless situations. It favors solutions that can be taught, repeated, and measured. Actions that succeed only under precise, unrepeatable conditions are acknowledged but not institutionalized. Hayes's action fit that category. It worked because of terrain that constrained sightlines. It worked because of an enemy conditioned to expect threats from above. It worked because of environmental factors that masked sound and movement. It worked because of individual physical tolerance and restraint. Remove any one of those elements, and the outcome likely changes. There is no indication that Hayes believed he had discovered a superior method. His decision reflected adaptation rather than innovation. He responded to a specific problem using the only option he believed remained viable. When historians examine the Hurtgen Forest campaign, the focus remains on larger forces, on artillery density, on weather, on command decisions, on casualty figures. Individual actions dissolve into aggregate effects. Hayes's engagement appears only indirectly, if at all. Yet its value lies in what it reveals about combat reality. Doctrine provides structure. It offers guidance where chaos would otherwise dominate. But doctrine is built on assumptions about how enemies behave and how environments function. When those assumptions shift, even temporarily, outcomes change. The forest that November did not allow height to confer advantage. Trees shattered under artillery. Elevated positions became liabilities. German countermeasures adapted faster than manuals could. Hayes responded not by rewriting doctrine, but by stepping outside it. The Army did not follow. That decision was rational. For every instance where deviation succeeds, there are countless others where it fails catastrophically. Institutions are built to minimize failure, not to chase anomalies. As the winter of 1944 deepened, fighting continued under the same conditions, casualties mounted, terrain remained unforgiving. The forest claimed attention without offering clarity. Hayes survived the war. After demobilization, he returned to civilian life without public acknowledgement of the event. There are no recorded lectures, no memoirs, no preserved testimony beyond routine service records. His name does not appear in accounts of tactical innovation. What remains is an absence. An action that achieved its immediate purpose without leaving a clear imprint on policy or memory. From a distance, the engagement near Vozenac does not read as a turning point. It did not alter the campaign. It did not change doctrine. It did not inspire emulation. It did something narrow. It delayed. In war, delay can matter as much as advance. Time allows adjustment. It allows reinforcement. It allows survival. Those effects are often invisible once achieved. The forest absorbed the evidence. The reports absorbed the outcome. The manuals remained unchanged. Between expectation and reality, a brief gap opened. Then it closed.